Okay, welcome to another session of Examine Lives. Today on the role of gossip. So I'm gonna leave this to be pretty brief because I think um, we can think of this pretty simply. So gossip, which we could define as social comparison about an absent third party, can act as both social regulator and interpersonal weapon. And I think the critical evolutionary praxis here is the multi-level dimension. So gossip can be thought of as like neutral or positive gossip when it's about the enforcement of pro-social norms. So in this case, when you're gossiping about somebody who has violated a pro-social norm, it's acting as a corrective, preventative force against those antisocial behaviors in two ways. One is by telling the people you're gossiping with who not to trust or not to cooperate with, or at least to lower the amount that they'll do that, right? You're holding in skepticism somebody who has demonstrated a non-cooperative, non-trustful behavior. On the other hand, because we do this and because we know we do this, it's also preventative of antisocial behaviors in the first place, because if you do it, people are gonna gossip about you, and you're gonna have your reputation and your relationships affected in a negative way. So it comes back around, and in this way, this kind of pro-social or positive gossip, pro-social oriented, or we can call it positive in that sense that it's beneficial to those the group really. I think that's really what we can think of it as. On the other hand, of course, we can gossip without having a pro-social frame, without reflecting any sort of norm violation. You could just gossip about people. Turns out from one of these papers that was shared on our high-low by Ken, I like this distribution of like the vast majority of gossip being neutral, not really about pro-social norms, but also not so venomous either. And then on the extreme ends, you have positive and sort of negative. And so it's on the negative side where we're now more at an individual level. And by that, I mean, my gossip about this third party becomes something where their status is lowered, right? Relative to the people gossiping. Maybe ours is even elevated, and what we're gossiping about might just be to do that alone, right? To lower their status. It's not something that's corrective, or that there's a mutually beneficial behavior we want to enforce. We're just finding ways to lower the status. So the function becomes very different, even though the act is very similar. So I think that's why gossip has this interesting kind of stigma, because we recognize that when two people are gossiping, you don't know which form it's taking. And so the function of that can be very different. So I almost think the negative stigma around gossip is itself like a bit of an adaptive aspect to limit gossip, that is, in this kind of put down interpersonal weapon way. Um, Meaning that if you are going to gossip, you better make sure that it's on the neutral or pro-social side. Otherwise, you'll be seen as a gossiper. So it, on the one hand, is really important, and people do it a lot. So much of our time is spent talking about other people, and on the other hand, we do it quietly, even if we're doing it in a positive way. Um, and finally, all of this makes sense in a context in which we know each other and we actually are able to interact over the long term, and see the implications of our reputation, our trustworthiness, flow through our social network. But in the world we live in today, it's fair to say that the function that gossip as a trait, as a behavior, is often in evolutionary mismatch in the ultra societies that we live in. Even if you don't live in an ultra society, there's still a scale that, of just simply even participating online, that a lot of the context and how like the reputation and trust is flowing gets dropped to the point that even if you are talking about somebody in a sense of trying to in a pro-social sense, a positive form of gossip, that you may be talking about it with somebody who doesn't know them, or that you may not interact with that person for a very long time. And certainly the distance between us can be vast. And so whether that's actually going to do anything for anyone, both preventative or corrective, becomes less clear. And even that would, in that case, it's possible that even pro-social or positively motivated gossip becomes kind of impotent, or because it's so devoid of the necessary social context, becomes something that feels like we're doing something helpful, but actually is almost more of a band-aid, right? Like we're talking about people we're never actually going to meet, or really who are never going to feel this change that's happening, especially when you think about talking about strangers in a movie theater who are talking and things like that. Like the gossip that we have between friends we're not connected. So there's an evolutionary mismatch piece, which might be interesting to think about in terms of the cultural stigma that it might carry today. So that being said, I would like to leave it with the fact that we do spend a lot of time talking about other people. We can call that gossip or not, but a lot of the studies that we've looked at, it's amazing how much time people spend doing this kind of behavior. So the functional question is whether that is still useful, and in what ways. So that's gossip and the role of gossip, and we can open it up. All right, I'm seeing their new norms. So let's go. I saw Diane and then Hank both want to follow up on my preamble here. So let's go with Diane first and then to Hank.
Yeah, I don't, I'm going to just add something to your preamble, which is to say that there might be another function, which is bonding between the gossipers.
Mm-hmm.
In other
Right.
words, if you're expressing an opinion about somebody else's behavior, that's showing that you trust the person that you're speaking to, and vice versa. And so you may use it as a way to become closer to somebody else, or to cultivate trust between you and not the person you're gossiping about, but the one you're gossiping with.
Very true. I think that's probably why we do it so much, because there's a bonding moment and a reaffirmation around who does know the right way to behave. Okay, let's do Hank and then Kathleen, building on.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna, let's see, I think this is the hand up. I'm gonna add something to what you're saying. I have to talk about it more from my world and as a therapist, but it's all about group belonging. I think the way Diane suggested too, we cannot survive without belonging to a group, at least in our ancient evolutionary storage place. But I think in what I've seen in other literature, not evolutionary literature, we want to confirm our perceptions of what's going on around us, whether it's about a situation, whether it's about another person. So I'm going to call that, we're looking for consensual validation. Do I see things, am I off the mark for this group? Do I think about things so differently that I'll never make it in this group? Or am I on a similar wavelength to this unofficial group norm of how we see things? So
Okay.
so if we think about it on an evolutionary level, which I haven't thought about it, but it's definitely that way. You're growing up in a family, we mimic other people so we can belong. Babies do it. We're all doing it. Our brains neurobiologically are always mimicking, hundreds of billions of neurons floating around mimicking. If I raise my hand, everybody, their brain is seeing me raise my hand, and in your brain, you're raising your hand. I forget, that's part of mirror neurons. So
Mm.
just want to add that to separate from gossip,
Yeah.
which gossip is a big deal.
Okay, so now we have gossip as social regulator, gossip as a bonding activity as well. And then part of that is also this, let's call it like social norm validation, almost behavioral validation. This is that was wrong, right? Or this is the right way to behave, right? So you're bonding through affirmation of, what's the normative behavior, and doing that in relation to somebody who is messed up, maybe. Okay, Kathleen, adding on.
Oh, I can thank Hank for talking about group belonging. And it reminds me of Jonathan Haidt. I can't remember if it's in the happiness hypothesis or the righteous mind, but he says the best way for two people to bond is just find something wrong with a third person, and voila, you have a bond. And so this was going with the idea of group belonging. I think establishing norms when the norms aren't clear is part of that desire to belong. And I think that might be why in middle school, at least girls especially, they're going to start finding a lot of fault with one another. And I don't think they ever stop, actually, but and very often on something to do with, whether she wore a really short skirt. But even in the workplace, when I arrived, someone said to me, and she never wears nylons. And I said, well, I don't wear nylons, they're a ripoff. And I think there was a sort of idea of like, what is the norm? What is the group that we belong to, and what will be its norms? And that gossip, when you get beyond a group that has clear shared norms, a small group, there might be an attempt by different groups to negotiate things in their own favor. Sorry if that's going off the point now, but it's a group belonging thing that I'm trying to explore here. That's it.
Well, I think that's actually a really important difference there, Kathleen. We're kind of talking about gossip as like in reference to norms, something that is normal, established, and you're calling somebody out. But actually, maybe part of the glee of gossip is that it's actually a really creative act. So you get to, by gossiping, you get to create bonds that you wouldn't have had because you're related to each other by a shared difference to somebody else. And you also get to do that in relation to what is the normative behavior. So you get to, in that moment, actually define what's normative, even if it's just in this two-person thing. We're now agreeing that this is the right way, even if it's not true at all in the real sense. It certainly is an opportunity to participate in the changing or creation of social norms. And then it's just a question of whether those social norms are to whose benefit, what level. But I think that's actually really important, that gossip is a mechanism by which individuals, pairs of individuals, maybe, less than the size of the group, can then actually engage at group level behavior. I feel like that's something we don't think about when we're thinking about norms as already existing. Okay, seems like we're good there. Ken, new thread for us.
Okay, first, very brief mention that, no matter how much you disagree with what someone just said, you're signaling with the index one. Just thought I'd mention that. Okay, I just wanted to say that there's something that's very interesting about gossip, and then, well, first of all, just a little basis. I look at things from an evolutionary standpoint. We are driven in three ways for our behaviors. We're driven to protect our genes three ways: one through ourself, one through our family, through our eusocial/tribal group. So we're being driven to do that, and behavior we do solves one of those things. Gossip does at the same time. For one thing, it shows, oh, you are looking out for the group, and it's good for you because your level within the group. It shows others that you are a sincere group member, therefore is evolutionarily adaptable for you. It's also good for the group, helps the group to identify and deal with those who are not following the norms. So it's very interesting. It's a behavior that's adaptive in two ways, not just in one, I think.
Yeah. Thanks, Ken. I think I was maybe missing a word here or there from your signal. I'm not sure. I did get most of it though, but a couple things did drop out. But that's okay. I think it was 90% came through. Anyone want to build on that? I'll leave it open. Hank.
Coming again from a psychoanalytic perspective, there are some theories, like a guy named Heinz Kohut talked about what we need to not only survive, but to thrive, what he called mirroring or echoing, twinship, and the need to idealize some authority. Let's say this is for children. So mirroring and echoing means like I say, "Hey, it's a nice day," and you say, "Yeah, it's a nice day." The twinship is like we're buddies, we love to play golf, and we twin on golf. And these are and the third one he calls idealization, which it's like a God figure, or mommy or daddy is so wonderful, they're so grand, and I never thought about those things in terms of evolution and, I guess, survival and thriving. So I'm just adding a dimension to, it's not about gossip per se, but it's about what we need to survive, yeah, but to thrive. So, like there was some research by a guy named Renee Spitz about institutionalized babies, I think in the 50s. And they, because in those days they didn't touch babies, they just fed them and left them alone. They found out they coined this term marasmus, which means the babies died because they weren't touched. So, so what am I saying about that? Yes, so there is something for survival, and I don't know how gossip, in the way we're talking about it, fits into this realm of being able to make it in life, in addition to thriving. I don't know if it's a familiar concept to many of the academics here, but it's one that it's very familiar to me.
Ken.
Well,
Adding
just
on.
30 seconds, just very briefly. That's what the adaptiveness for the individual. It's good for the individual. It raises her status. It puts her in the group, and people in groups going it alone, a good adaptive choice for Homo sapiens. So by say making it, and she's just elevating herself and securing in the, I don't know, Desperate Housewives of the Africans, whatever we had during our days club through the sands.
Yeah, it seems like maybe there's a context aspect to this, like kind of coming back to Kathleen's point around whether there's ambiguity or uncertainty. So there's like when we don't get that social confirmation or validation from each other, it becomes, for a baby, it could be extremely harmful, but also as adults, you can become isolated, depressed, disillusioned. We need these things we need to actually experience them in some way. You can picture that sort of distasteful version of gossip in a context in which it's not unclear, like everyone gets it. And so we're we're just doing it even though we don't need to do it, right? We're just like, let's gossip. Let's just gossip, even though we are all well aware of the norms or well aware of what needs to happen here. So something about that seems really key. I also wanted to bring the point. Oh, Rob, yeah. Or actually, Kathleen, did you want to jump in first?
No, Rob had his finger up. I was going to do something new.
Okay, Rob.
Sorry, I've got everything on a big screen and I'm trying to get to the mute button. Two things occur to me. One is that gossip, as I've been reading about it in the evolutionary literature, is about small groups and basically controlling bullies or bad actors in small groups. And I've been very curious in the whole pro-social thing about how that's going to scale up to a planet. And it seems to me that when I talk to people and I mention that we're interested in gossip, they always conclude that it's malicious gossip. And I think that, I mean, it's universal with people I talk to initially, and they don't believe that gossip is a good thing or can be a good thing. And I find that puzzling, but it may be a scaling factor that when we try to gossip about, we can gossip about what's going on in the Middle East or what's going on in Washington, but that's not really gossip because we're not talking about people we know whose behavior we're trying to control.
Right.
We can gossip about that's not controlling his behavior. So I don't know how this works.
Yeah.
Scaling up. It seems like it's getting deformed.
Yeah, right. And so it's worth noting our as in everyone in this room's cultural perception of gossip might very much be based on the scaling difference of how we really experience it. Talking politics is often like, this kind of mismatched gossip scale. Like they're never going to hear you.
Right.
It certainly isn't affecting them. So and yeah, it's important too. It's like we don't want there's scale. There's scale, but like you can scale in different ways, and we also don't necessarily need to but I get what I'm trying to say is we could have a planetary scale of 500 million groups of two. I mean, 3.5 billion groups of two, or one group of two groups of 3.5 billion, like, okay, well, that's not the same thing. But what is the volume of people involved? Something fractal about how we could scale. What that looks like in practicality is where we must study.
It's supposed to be nested groups, but how do nested groups scale their gossip?
Well, then you need to have a group gossip about a group, two groups gossip about a third group. But of course, that's really just individuals acting as a group. And if the groups that we're really most able to gossip about are those that are small, then in order for us to gossip about other groups, we're just inherently at too large of a scale already. Now we're dealing with 3 different groups. So, but the function of it is interesting. And even if the behavior doesn't translate to higher levels, it's actually probably worth thinking about how could we replicate the function. Diane, adding to?
Adding to, but by bringing something new in. It seems like that there's this one behavior that is, as you were pointing out, condemned. And I think the condemnation mostly comes back to the possibility that people will lie about each other. So, even one of the 10 commandments is don't bear false witness against your neighbor. And so even in ancient times, people were recognizing that that is a danger. But there are all these other functions that we've been talking about, the group formation and maintenance, and also coalition formation. I don't think we use that word, but when you're bonding with somebody, it's that. But when you come to the scaling idea, it seems to me we really need to talk about social media. Because that is a way of finding other people who share your norms and want to condemn the same things and praise the same things, and so on and so forth.
Interesting how public it is, of course, too. You know, you can with gossip you can condemn somebody subversively, but social media is the opposite. It's wide in public, and ideally everybody knows that you said it, including the person, and then they become canceled. But like that is like a very different thing, probably reflecting of the failure of that scale and the fact that the interpersonal relationships are very shallow. Rob?
But exclusion in a small group is not very different from cancellation.
Sure, but exclusion in a just massive distributed amorphous network of people connected online feels like excluding them from a small group, but there is no small group, right? That's the problem. And then they go on living their lives in their normal groups that they're a part of and not at all excluded from. So we've actually made it kind of weak. Rob and Hank, adding on to Diane.
I just wanted to say that much of social media is also anonymous, and we don't know who's saying it. We don't know what the source of it is. A lot of it's repeated. It's retweeted or whatever it's called now. And that's new. When you're gossiping with people in person, you know who they are. You can see their mouth move. But on social media, you can't. I think it's poisonous.
And they're bots.
It's also ambiguous of the relations that you, the gossipers, and have to this other person who may be like this. Basically, you're really gossiping about more of an abstract entity. If you're talking about somebody who's like a celebrity or just known entity, so it's like you're not really gossiping around social relations that are real. You're almost pretending as if they were real, as if you are connected and doing this behavior. And then the function of which ends up being quite different because of that. Hank, did you want to?
Yeah, I want to go back to basics again, because in this erudite discussion, I'm losing track of the definition of gossip. So I'm going to go back to what Kathleen said about Jonathan Haidt, and is that, you said it in one way, the best way to bond is to find something wrong with somebody else. Well, whether it's bonding or not, is gossip bad-mouthing somebody else? I don't want to call it good gossip or not. I'm just saying this is what we do. We badmouth somebody else, whether it's in a small group, when we're all drunk, when we're at a political convention, when you're in court, with Donald Trump, and it's. I think it's bad-mouthing rather than. I want to have it. Yeah.
I don't think it's bad mouthing. It's just it is but whether it's bad or not is one of the options you can take.
Finding fault with another, the way.
Well, that's the neutral gossip category, right? We can leave the judgment unsaid. We can just simply note about somebody else who's not present, something they did. Oh, did you see that they parked the car in the compact spot, their SUV in the, just so I don't know, trying to think of something sort of innocuous, but whatever, like just something like that, or even more mundane. Did you see the hat they were wearing? Is that bad as a neutral? It's you're doing this thing of talking about somebody who's not there, implicitly comparing,
for the moment, I want to stay on the side that it's bad mouthing, it's finding fault for the moment, because it's getting too confusing for me, especially when you talk about upscaling it. If I think of it in a simplistic way, well, how do you pass along finding fault other than social media? It all depends on our social groups and if the norm is to find fault. I come from a immigrant family who grew up in, Jewish people who grew up in little shtetls in Poland. Man, they were into gossip, that whole community. I mean, we're
All
not
right.
talking about, and it's like, it wasn't terrible. It wasn't like, oh, they're horrible. But it's like, oh, I don't know, this one dress is funny,
Hmm.
or this one has a limp. You know, it's like, it wasn't just a statement, well, this guy has a limp. It's like Jimmy the Gimp is like, it is not a great thing to have a limp. So that's why I'm
Right.
suggesting so just want to clarify where I am with it. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, maybe the function is about pointing out fault. So there's always some implicit sense, but of course it doesn't actually
Yeah,
have to be that.
right. Yeah.
Kathleen and Ken, adding to that. Kathleen first.
Yeah, first of all, absolutely gossip. I mean, I think the word gossip just has a negative valence for us.
Yeah.
It absolutely does. And maybe that's because we're in a society that does not really tend to view talking about others as anything but potentially a landmine, if not deliberately malicious. But the fact is that gossip or talking about other people who aren't present could have an adaptive value that's simply informative. Did you see the way they park their car? Oh, I might start parking my car that way too, and it would be more convenient or whatever.
Mhm.
So that gossip, if we just think of it as talking, if we just have that neutral meaning, then we can keep in that we obtain new information that can be potentially useful. And then, of course, some of the information is social, but then again, we are not in the small groups that might have had their norms about when it's appropriate to talk about others. And I'm just thinking with Quaker meeting, when there's, like, let's say somebody talks too much at Quaker, then someone can feel moved to say, deliver a message, but they're not supposed to memorize it ahead of time. It's supposed to be a spontaneous thing, and you're supposed to keep it short, and you're not supposed to have a message more than once at a meeting, okay? So let's just say somebody is giving messages that are too long, and they're repeatedly giving messages at a Quaker meeting. The concern is the group, right? The concern is, oh, what can we, how can we make this person feel bad for doing this? The concern is really the group, and what can we do to restore things? And part of the Quaker faith and practice is that there you have a set of ways to address it. So one person could, on their own, gently take the person aside later and say, I appreciate what you used to say at meeting, but it goes on for too long. And faith and practice, I remind you, whatever, But if that doesn't work, then two Quakers get together to talk to the person. So I guess what I'm saying is that there's a notion that you're addressing a problem, which is the behavior, not the person. And the goal is to restore the ideals of the group. That's what your focus is. And so I think that we're so far from that kind of pro-social attitude that it's the group we're trying to preserve and everybody's welfare, including the person who might seem to be the problem, right? And then, of course, by talking to the person, you can find out something we're doing that is causing their problem in a certain way. So talking behind the person's back, you don't get to get the input of the person who might initially be perceived as the troublemaker. And I'm just saying that, Quakers, their religion was born of being persecuted for being different. So they're very sensitive to these things, so they try to be. And I think we've lost that. And we say gossip, and it just automatically sounds negative no matter what. But even when a person might be causing a problem, the attitude is not to start, seeing if you can make them lower on the social hierarchy. The attitude is, how can we raise everybody up again?
Yeah. And I'll just add Hal's point on the chat because I think it connects to what you said. One thing you said, Kathleen, which is just the information sharing piece. Like, and it's actually really important because social norms aren't just going to happen by us all just individually observing each other quietly and then somehow just copying each other or doing the right thing. I mean, we have to talk about what we're doing and we have to talk to each other. So there's the validation, what's the right behavior. And Hal is also just like reminding that conversation between people about people is how we gain the perspective of what's going on. Maybe some of that is corrective, maybe some of that's about restoring behavior, that kind of thing. Maybe some of that is actually more selfish, like I don't like that person, so I'm doing that. It's not about a group thing, it's about my thing. Maybe some of it's just this person is doing this, isn't that interesting? Now we are confirming we know about it. So yeah, there is actually, it's always useful to remember, like there is no group, it's still just people acting as a group. And how do we do that? We do that in various configurations. Yeah, sometimes we do literally all act in a similar way, but the leap from the individual to the group is definitely through these little pairs and bonds and those kinds of things. And so it's like a group emerges out of that. And I think just the act of sharing about others, different than social comparison, of course, right? Social comparison is, I think, what gossip is. So this is maybe a little bit of a broader thing that we can do more innocently. Okay, it seems like we had Ken.
Briefly, I just wanted to sort of sum this up. Essentially, gossip is any communication about another individual within a that is useful to maintaining the integrity of the group. It can be positive, it can be negative gossip, it can, in most cases, it's neutral, but it's simply advising the group, yep, this person's doing this, that person's doing that, and others can decide whether or not in the norms. And the reason that I suspect that negative draws the most negative attention is, first of all, it may be false. It may be that the individual is doing that because he has something that other person. And so his contribution is not helpful to the group. It may be helpful to him to have that other person that he doesn't like degraded. It's not helpful to the group. So that's my suspicion.
Rob, I saw your hand, but then you put it down. Oh, Mike, add to.
Yeah, I think this is add to, but I'm not really sure if it introduces anything new. My overview is that I first heard about gossip in terms of the evolution of cooperation back to Axelrod's book. When you decide how you're going to cooperate with some person, it depends on your past experience with them, basically the amount of trust you have. But you can also, by learning about how they cooperated with somebody else, hearing stories about how they acted in different situations, you can decide for yourself how to behave towards them. And essentially that's what gossip is. It's telling them, exchanging information in this sense about how they acted towards others in other situations, which also means you're essentially learning about their reputation. Now, actually, reputation is something I don't think we fully appreciate as much as we should in a lot of these discussions. And in fact, it may be a topic for discussion in itself one of these weeks. But when you're hearing about someone else's reputation, you also can take into account the reputation of the person telling you and how honest they tend to be. So reputation plays in that aspect too. In terms of scaling up to social media, it is difficult because either person is anonymous or you don't understand the reputation of them on social media. So how do you evaluate what they're saying? That's what becomes hard. That's many people have realized the lack of understanding a person's reputation online is a problem that somehow needs to be resolved. It's really bad with anonymous posts, but even things that are not anonymous, they're essentially anonymous if you don't know the person at all making it and how much you should trust them. That's it.
I would like to offer us to also think about social media in terms of our own use with high-low, which is distinctly small groups, sized, very not anonymous, and we are definitely know each other. I mean, it's certainly far more than most social media. So there is reputation and of all kinds, and over a long period of time. So I mean, that's like what high-low is about. That's why we're there. Here's an opportunity to just try to bring the best of it into a digital space, but it is a little bit harder to gossip on there, right? Like, I mean, how are you going to do that? I guess you could message somebody in the side, but you certainly can't post about it. That's not quite the same. So it's almost like, unless you had a norm of people sending private messages to each other to regulate the group, then these digital groups, even when they are more properly formed, lack gossip as a social function, at least in the convenience it normally has, where we can just talk discreetly. Everything's more in public. So what does that do for that group? It seems like something to explore. And I would say I'm more interested in that than, we all know, the social media of the macro scale that's purely there to just exploit our time and money is not not the way forward. We can say a lot about it, but at the same time, even when we do try to fix some of those things, it's still tricky to replicate human behavior in that way. A lot that hasn't been done. Cesar, and then Hank.
I've been working with students in schools, and the problem that Kathleen talked about, and that was very much studied by Jonathan Haidt, involves many of teenager students, mainly girls. And what we have been seeing is that when they go to the digital world, so what would be the mouth-to-mouth spread of gossip? You go there and you have an amplification. So you reach lots of friends, or even anonymously. You know that the stories they are talking is about that they know each other, but they are doing it anonymously. So I think the problem is really, it's a medium size, because if you think it's a micro problem, because everyone knows each other, when you go to the digital world, so you lose control. Who has access, how much or how fast it spreads. And I think this still has the function of a gossip to prejudice, to make damage, but it's much harder to handle, and it's really a big problem in schools. So we are working with this kind of spread of gossips. And the other point that I would like to make is everything that is different, people talk about. You can consider this. So if their attention is called for something from someone, they will talk about it. So you can consider it as a gossip, because they are talking about something that is different from the usual culture. But for me, most of the time, it's just trying to make sense of the difference. In this sense, the function is evolutionary in evoluting with the change. So they are trying to make sense. It's not a function to keep things as it were, so as to fix norms, but also to change norms, to make sense. Maybe they need to keep this change, and to do it, they need to follow what is different, what's happening differently from what they are used.
Hmm. Let's go just to Rob. We'll come back to you, Hank.
Oh, I'm on. Okay. Two things. One, I put in the chat the etymology of the word gossip, which I think is interesting if you know the history of in language, how a word changes, since it starts from the word God and sibling. So it's somebody who's related to you in God. So when I'm thinking about tribal gods, non-monotheistic gods, small groups have their own gods, and the people who are having idle talk is the way it ends up in the 17th century, are related to each other with a common shared cultural set of beliefs. And I think that's important. And I just want to say I was at a conference recently, and one of the papers was on journalism, which was tracking how journalists pick up items from each other and post them on their own sites, and how long those items last on the sites and how far they spread. So there's a whole science now of tracking that kind of published gossip, I would say. So we're dealing with a very complex world.
Hank?
Yeah, I'm still going back to basics. So I was, as we were talking, I was doing some more reading online here. And it's all about at least this particular stuff. And they also talk about it from the Old and New Testament, about the literature about gossip. So we have Timothy and Matthew, we have Proverbs, but it's there are so many linguistic terms here. But the biggest thing, it's talking about someone, it's behind their back. Forget about what you're saying for the moment, but that seems to be I haven't done a thorough research in this 5 minutes, but it's about talking someone behind their back. And one of the commentaries that has to do with Judeo-Christian notion about it's like it's looking for people's sins and then outing them behind their back that they've committed a sin. I mean, that's just one source, but this is sort of this is more of a Christian website where it's about sin. So I still want to, if we define gossip, I still like to keep it talking about someone behind their back, and to see what that means in the evolutionary scale. What's the purpose of that? So I'm still there. Just want to share that. The other points are great, but I want to limit it to talking about somebody behind their back, not just chatting in the group and over the campfire. The person has to not be there.
Well, let me offer to like almost the neutral theory of gossip, regardless of the content, like whether it's talking about somebody as in they've done something bad or not. More just like the neutral piece, the neutral theory of it, as in the sense of like, if two people are talking about a third, they become closer by that, because what they're doing is highlighting the way in that which that person is different from them, thereby meaning implicitly why they are similar, even if it's about nothing. Nothing of substance, nothing of like anything. It could just, but the fact that that person is now, and so it's almost an inflation of the difference, because of course if that person was in the group, they find another person to talk about, so suddenly that person is just as similar. So in that way you can both create or establish norms. You can create bonding and all these things just by doing it, just by literally talking about somebody who's not there with somebody else.
Right.
That is like a causal act in an interesting way. And then importantly, it's subconscious, right? Like this doesn't, you don't need to be thinking about pro-social or selfish motivations. You don't need to be thinking about anything. If you're just
Well,
doing it,
well,
it's happening.
Sage, could we think of alliance building as pro-social, or is it alliance building?
Well, the pro-social is really just about the level that you're thinking about. So like the difference, you have to define some level of you want to select for at some group level. Could be a very small group, but then a pro-social behavior is defined in relation to that level. What's helping
So if
that
I
group.
say, so you and I, Sage, we're alike, and Johnny over there, who's on a vacation, we're not like Johnny.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's alliance building, right? Just not bad. Just Johnny's different, and we wear glasses or
Right.
something,
Yeah.
and that makes us. What does that do for the group?
Well, I think
If
in
everybody's
that kind
doing
of
this,
I think in that kind of sense, we're lower than, like, if it's a group of three, we are at a lower level than the group. Right. And so the pro-social piece is like whether what we're talking about is alliance building around something Johnny is doing or not doing, or something we should
okay,
do, that would be what we all want to do. But yeah, totally. I think if you're just doing like the more neutral version of gossip, just simply talking about somebody comparing when they're not present, maybe that's part of the negative connotation, that unless it really is about norms or really pro-social norms, it actually is a subgroup level alliance building. And again, it may be innocuous and may not, that doesn't mean it harms the group. But if we're getting stronger, that doesn't mean the group is somehow benefiting from that.
that's what I was getting at. Yeah, we don't know if the group is benefiting through this, or like I want to be liked by you. And that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that if you do like me more because I tell you Johnny's different, that doesn't mean the group is going to be stronger, whether it's for malicious purposes or pro-social purposes.
Yeah.
We cooperate for anything: war, peace. Making good pizza, making lousy pizza. These are all neutral about being. Would you say pro-social is about cooperating, or is it cooperating for a higher humanistic, higher moral code?
Yeah. I mean, it's just cooperating towards some level beyond the individual.
Oh, okay, more
But the
neutral.
levels, of course, are then if there's a higher level above that, then pro-social cooperation could be harmful there. As Kathleen reminds us, what's good for my clan is not good necessarily what's good for my nation.
Okay.
I like this theme that's been coming through and kind of what you're bringing back to the forefront, and Kathleen mentioned, but like this behavior as kind of like a search process, discovery, trying to make sure we both are seeing what we're seeing, validating it together. Then there's like this aspect of gossip that's doing it in relation to somebody's behavior. It might be something that just strengthens the people gossiping in relation to them. It could even be just to bring them down. It could be something about that is a pro-social norm and does so to actually help regulate and help the group, which that person is a part of, correcting their behavior, bringing back those norms. In all those cases, it really does matter what is said in the gossip, in that conversation. But in every case, it is, I think, an active discovery, an act of also creation, trying to say what is it that we should be doing, or what is it that I'm seeing? Are you seeing that too? And if we agree, then that means something. If we don't ever do that, we have a fundamental uncertainty about what is actually occurring. So it's a way to get out of our own perspective, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we are at the top of the hour, and I do want to just to make we'll decide our next topic again on high-low. We had a couple ideas there.
Sage,
Yeah.
may I bring something up? This may not be the area we want to go in, but since there's a couple of major wars going on, and I didn't get to write it in, but I was thinking about if we could go back to one of our previous examined lives on war, but to sort of bring it up to date and think about we're in the middle of stuff. And I've really been terribly affected by this massive human slaughter going on. For whatever reasons, the Middle East is getting me more than Russia. I don't know. I don't have much to do with Russia for some reason. But the Palestinians are been getting a raw deal, I don't know for how many thousands of years. And the Israelis, they look like they're not getting a raw deal compared to the Palestinians. But to keep it out of our own personal biases, I wonder if it'd be worth talking about, I don't know what we're going to call this, war, but in the context of we're in the middle of it, as it suggests to me. I have no expertise in it. It is just on my mind a lot.
Sure. Right. Let's examine our lives more on.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's add
that's
those
a good-
suggestions on. I'll do another sort of roundup. We were also talking about elders, grandmother hypothesis kind of stuff. And I just wanted to note too at the end, one, to thank Ken for his suggestion. I think this norm of adding on versus adding something new, I notice right away that it actually creates an obvious cooperative goal for our discussion, right? So now we're all quickly trying to think. So now our individual incentive of wanting to participate is coupled with, can I help this person make their point better? Can I help add to it? And then we almost basically cooperate to exhaust the possibility of that idea, which means when we do get to talk, you're trying to also think about what can I say that others can build on rather than what can I say that, just stands on its own, because that's not as fun. and then it also at the same time, if you do have a novel thing, you want to take it somewhere else, that can be in support of us having sort of finished an idea. So it's really interesting how just a little norm like that changes sort of the dynamic. It only took us 3 years to think of something different, but
But we didn't gossip today.
shows how strong norms are, right? We can't remember if we can just create them on the spot. So that's fun. Let's try more of that. And we'll connect on Hilo for our next session topic. And we should have Steve with us then too. So thanks everybody. This was really great.
Thank you, Sage. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey, Sage,
Mhm.
you did talk about the